imagine finding out that the story of Adam and Eve isn't a creation myth at all,
Right.
but rather it's like a 4,000-year-old political smear campaign.
Yeah.
Like a calculated piece of propaganda that was designed to overthrow this this ancient, highly advanced society where women held all the power, where they owned the property and they worshipped a supreme female creator.
It sounds like a dystopian novel, honestly.
It really does.
No.
But today, for our deep dive, we're actually looking at a historical synthesis that argues exactly that.
Yeah.
We're tackling a specific listener request today, and we're opening up this seminal audiobook called When God Was a Woman by Merlin Stone.
Right.
And I just have to say, like, reading through these archaeological records and the ancient texts, it's kind of like finding an older, completely different architectural blueprint.
Oh, totally.
Just buried beneath a city you've lived in your entire life. Suddenly the streets you walk every day, they don't make sense anymore.
Yeah, you see everything differently. And our listener asked us to explore the roots of what we call a patriarchal society, right?
Exactly.
And to compare that to the historical evidence of early civilizations that worshipped a goddess.
Yeah, the early goddess cultures.
And it's an incredibly provocative prompt. But before we go any further into the archaeological evidence that the author presents, we really have to establish a firm ground rule for this conversation.
Right, the disclaimer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because the source material we're unpacking, it touches on highly charged political and religious themes. I mean, Merlin Stone's work heavily critiques patriarchal religions, specifically pointing to Judeo-Christian and Islamic traditions. And she frames their historical development as a politically motivated system used to oppress women.
Right.
So we need to be abundantly clear right up front. We are not here to endorse or attack any religious texts.
Absolutely not.
We aren't taking a side. We're not endorsing a specific religious viewpoint.
Yeah.
And we are absolutely not here to condemn any modern faith.
Yeah, we are just the guides today.
Exactly. Our mission is strictly impartial. We are just here to objectively unpack the author's specific theories, her historical arguments about how human society shifted from female to male deities.
Okay, so keeping that strictly objective lens, let's unpack this timeline. Because I think for a lot of people in the Western world, Judeo-Christian texts like Genesis, they're kind of informally taught as the absolute beginning of recorded time.
Right. It's seen as the baseline.
Yeah, the literal beginning.
Which is actually the very first misconception this book targets.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The events of the Bible, which people assume take place at the dawn of creation, they actually occurred well into the historic period.
Okay.
So if we look at Abraham, the first prophet of the Hebrew God Yahweh, scholars generally place his life somewhere between 1800 and 1550 BC.
Okay, so that's a long time ago.
It is. But the critical point here is that thousands of years before Abraham ever walked the earth, there were thriving, complex, highly developed civilizations spanning the Near and Middle East.
Wow.
And these civilizations worshipped a supreme female creator.
So we're talking about a timeline that makes the Roman Empire look like it was just yesterday.
Precisely. Stone traces the archaeological evidence all the way back to the Upper Paleolithic Age.
Okay.
So to give some context, we're talking about the Grevetian and Aurignacian cultures. This is roughly 25,000 BC.
The Ice Age.
Yes, the Ice Age. These are hunter-gatherer societies living in incredibly harsh environments. And this is where archaeologists have found those famous Venus figures.
Oh, right. Yeah, I've seen photos of those in our history books. They're usually pretty small, right? Like made of stone or bone.
Very small. They usually fit right into the palm of a hand. They're carved from mammoth ivory or limestone or clay.
The Venus of Willendorf is one of those, right?
Yeah, the most famous example.
Yeah.
And they are these faceless female figures, often with really exaggerated breasts and bellies and hips,
Right.
suggesting pregnancy or, immense nourishment. But what's staggering is the geographic spread.
Oh, they were everywhere.
Yeah, they've been found buried near hearths from ancient dwellings from Spain all the way across Europe, deep into Siberia.
Wow. Okay, so you have this totally unified iconography spanning entire continents during the Ice Age.
Exactly.
But how do we know they were actually worshiping them? Like, could they just be, I don't know, ancient good luck charms or just early art without a religious context?
That's a fair question, and for a long time that was actually the assumption.
Right.
But as we move forward in time to the Neolithic period, so around 7000 BC, the evidence shifts from small personal carvings to monumental formalized religion.
Ah, okay.
So let's look at a site like Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey. That dates to about 6500 BC. It's one of the earliest proto-cities in the world.
Yeah, I was reading the Nights on Çatalhöyük, and the layout of this place is just mind-bending.
Yeah, it's wild.
There were no streets, like the houses were all packed tightly together like a honeycomb, and people just walked across the roofs and climbed down ladders to get inside.
Exactly. It's a completely alien urban landscape to us. But when archaeologists excavated those honeycomb houses, they found dozens of dedicated shrines.
Oh, wow.
And the principal deity depicted in those shrines was undeniably female. She was shown in three distinct aspects, which is a motif that echoes through a lot of history.
Right, the maiden, mother, crone kind of thing.
Yes, exactly. A young woman, a mother giving birth, often seated on a throne flanked by lions or leopards, and an old woman. It was a highly organized worship of a great goddess.
Okay, so the obvious question for me is why? Like, if early humans are trying to make sense of the universe, why did they just universally land on a female creator?
Right.
And the author's explanation for this relies on some really interesting early human biology, doesn't it?
It does. It rests on the primitive understanding of conception. The author draws on anthropological evidence suggesting that in these early societies, the male role in reproduction just wasn't understood.
Because of the time delay.
Right. There's a massive delay between the active intercourse and the visible signs of pregnancy,
Yeah.
let alone the actual birth. So if you're an early human and you don't have a microscope to understand cellular biology, you don't necessarily connect an act of intimacy in the winter with a baby being born in the autumn.
That makes so much sense. If you don't make that biological connection, then from your perspective, women literally possess this magical, singular power to produce human life out of thin air. They just swell up and bring forth a new person. That is a superpower.
It's the ultimate superpower. Women were observed to be the sole producers of life.
Right.
Therefore, when these societies looked up at the stars or looked at the forests and rivers and asked that fundamental human question, where did all this come from?
They pictured a woman.
They naturally envisioned the ultimate creator of the universe as a divine ancestress, a great mother. The macrocosm reflected the microcosm.
That is such a profound shift in perspective, and it makes complete logical sense. If only women make life in the tribe, a woman must have made the world. But in the source material, the author seems incredibly frustrated with how these figures have been historically categorized. She really goes out of her way to stress that these goddesses were not just fertility idols.
Oh, yeah. She argues that labeling them as mere fertility idols is a gross sexist reduction.
Mm-hmm.
In the archaeological and mythological evidence she presents from later literate societies, these female deities were credited with the invention of civilization itself.
Wait, really? Not just agriculture?
No, they weren't just agricultural mascots. In Sumer, the goddess Nidaba was credited with inventing clay tablets and the art of writing.
Oh, wow.
In Mesopotamia, the goddess Ninlil provided her people with the understanding of farming and architecture. In Egypt, the goddess Ma'at wasn't about fertility at all.
What was she about?
She represented truth, order, rhythm, and the justice of the entire universe. These deities were lawmakers, inventors, healers, and even valiant warriors.
But wait, if these societies were so advanced, and this female-centric religion was dominant for literally thousands of years across multiple empires, how on earth did the academic world miss this?
Right.
I mean, archaeology has been a formal discipline for a long time. Why is this massive chunk of human history treated like a fringe theory?
What's fascinating here is the author lays the blame squarely at the feet of the academic establishment of the 19th and early 20th centuries.
Oh, really?
Yeah. She points out that the foundational excavations, the ones that set the baseline for our historical textbooks, they were conducted almost entirely by European men who possessed a very deep, internalized Judeo-Christian bias.
So they were basically looking at the ancient world through the stained glass windows of Victorian Europe.
That is a perfect way to put it. When these early archaeologists found male deities in ancient sites, they respectfully labeled them gods.
Right.
And described their worship as a religion.
Oh, I see.
But when they found overwhelming evidence of female deities, they consistently labeled them cults, or just dismissed them as primitive fertility figures.
Wow.
The author even notes the subtle semantics in their academic papers. Like, they routinely capitalized the word God when referring to male deities of antiquity, but used a lowercase g when writing about the Queen of Heaven.
Wow, it's such a subtle way of delegitimizing the findings. You frame the male deity as a valid theological concept and the female deity as just a pagan fetish.
Exactly. And it went far beyond mere semantics. It affected how they interpreted the physical evidence itself.
That's so.
The author details instances where archaeologists would uncover incredibly rich, elaborate burials, graves filled with gold, weapons, symbols of high status.
Okay.
And their immediate documented assumption would be this must be the tomb of a great king or a powerful warlord.
Oh, let me guess. The bones were actually female.
Over and over again.
Oh my God.
Decades later, when osteologists actually analyzed the skeletal remains, they discovered these were queens or high priestesses or female warriors.
That is crazy.
The early excavators' preconceived notions about male dominance completely blinded them to the reality of the evidence sitting right in front of their trowels.
It really hammers home that whoever writes the excavation reports basically controls the historical narrative.
Absolutely.
But this brings up a huge question for me. Having a female deity in the sky is one thing, but how did that translate to the ground?
Right.
Because we have instances in history of societies worshiping female figures, like the Virgin Mary, but still heavily oppressing actual human women. So did a female god in the ancient world actually equate to real female power on Earth?
To answer that, the author draws a crucial distinction between the terms matriarchal and matrilineal.
Okay.
A matriarchy implies a mirror image of a patriarchy, right? Where women hold all absolute political and physical power over subjugated men.
Right, like an inverted patriarchy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the author argues that what the evidence most strongly supports is that these ancient societies were matrilineal.
Okay, so if wealth and descent pass strictly through the mother's line in a matrilineal system, I'm picturing a society where women are essentially the anchors of the family structure.
Yes.
Like a modern trust fund or a family business, but only the daughters are on the board of directors. The women hold the deeds to the land, they manage the estates, and the men might marry in, but they don't take over.
You've essentially just described ancient Egypt and Sumer under this system.
Really?
Property, titles, wealth, and royal lineage were passed exclusively from mothers to daughters. A husband moving into his wife's home was the standard practice.
Wow.
Because the mother was seen as the singular, undeniable parent, the child took her name and her clan's identity.
And what did that look like day to day? Because that level of economic control has to change the social fabric completely.
The autonomy was staggering compared to later periods. Greek historians like Herodotus, who visited ancient Egypt much later, were absolutely shocked by what they saw.
What did they see?
They documented that Egyptian women walked freely in the markets, owned large businesses, and handled independent financial transactions and contracts.
Wow.
Meanwhile, the men often stayed home and wove at the loom.
No way.
Yeah. And in the Sumerian city of Nimrud, cuneiform records show women acting as judges and magistrates in courts of law. Women were highly educated scribes, they owned real estate in their own names, and in several regions, women held the exclusive rights to the royal throne.
So the queen is the true monarch, and the king is, what, just her plus one?
Essentially, yes. And this ties directly back to the religion.
Okay.
The author points out that the religious structure validated the social structure, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And nowhere is this clearer than in the ancient concept of the sacred marriage.
I was hoping we'd get to this, the doomed king. This was one of the most intense parts of the source material.
It is a profound shift from how we view royalty today. In these early matrilineal societies, the high priestess was considered the literal incarnation of the goddess on earth. So if a man wanted to be king, he couldn't simply inherit the throne from his father. He only achieved power by formally marrying the high priestess.
You as a consort.
Exactly. His power was entirely derived from her.
But he didn't get to keep the job very long, did he?
Originally, no. The author compiles evidence suggesting that in the most ancient Neolithic practices, this king consort was chosen annually.
Wow.
He was allowed to be the king, to enjoy the wealth and status for a single year. And at the end of that year, intertwined with the agricultural cycle of the harvest, he was ritually sacrificed.
Ritually sacrificed, like actually killed.
Yes. His blood was often returned to the earth to ensure the fertility of the crops for the next spring.
Talk about a glass ceiling for men in politics. I mean, you can be the king, but you have a 12-month expiration date.
Right. And this practice is the root of one of the most prevalent mythologies in the ancient world, the dying son or the dying lover.
Oh, like Adonis.
Yes. Figures like Tammuz in Babylon, Adonis in Greece, Osiris in Egypt. the young, beautiful male consort who dies tragically and is mourned annually by the great goddess.
Oh, I see.
The author suggests this universal myth wasn't just poetry. It was a direct reflection of the very real, very bloody practice of ritual regicide.
Okay, so presumably men eventually got tired of being sacrificed.
Understandably so. The author notes that as male power eventually began to grow, men wanted permanent kingship.
Yeah.
But they still had to operate within this female-dominated religious framework. So to hold on to power, male priests and kings went to extreme lengths to emulate the female clergy who originally held the sacred authority.
Like what?
Well, there are historical accounts of male priests castrating themselves, dedicating their severed organs to the goddess, and wearing women's clothing to perform sacred rites, just to legitimize their position in the temple.
Wait, does worshiping a female deity automatically guarantee women have real-world power? Or is the author confusing cause and effect? Like, did the religion shape the society, or did the society shape the religion?
That's a great question. It's a bit of a seesaw of cause and effect.
Yeah.
But the author points out that the two were inextricably linked. The theology was the absolute foundation for the social laws.
Right, okay. But wait, if you have this incredibly stable system where women own the property, manage the courts, and dissent is unquestioned because it goes through the mother, how does a patriarchal system even get a foothold?
Yeah.
Because you can't just politely ask half the population to hand over the deeds to their houses and step down from the priesthood.
You can't, and they didn't.
Mm.
According to the author, this 7,000-year-old societal structure didn't just fade away naturally, it was violently overthrown.
The northern invaders.
Yes, starting roughly around 2400 BC, but occurring in massive waves over a millennium, nomadic tribes swept down for the northern steppes of Eurasia.
Okay.
So the harsh environments around modern-day Russia and the Caucasus Mountains. These groups are generally referred to by historians as Indo-Europeans or Aryans.
Right.
They included cultures like the Hittites, the Hurrians, and later the Dorians who invaded Greece.
And their culture was basically the polar opposite of the goddess peoples they were invading.
Completely antithetical. They were aggressive, nomadic, pastoral cultures. They didn't rely on agriculture. They relied on herds, which required constant defense.
Ah!
So this birthed a martial culture. They brought horse-drawn war chariots, which were like the tanks of the ancient world.
Wow.
They brought weapons of bronze and iron. And crucially, they brought a strictly patriarchal social structure.
Because in a pastoral warrior society, physical strength and defending the herd dictate the power dynamics.
Exactly. And their theology reflected that. They worshipped male deities, usually sky gods or mountain gods, wielding lightning and fire.
Like Zeus.
Yes, like Indra in India or Zeus in Greece. They were gods of war and storms, not gods of earth and childbirth.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. So these northern tribes roll into the Near East and the Mediterranean with chariots and a totally different worldview. But they didn't just conquer the land, did they? If you want to hold on to a conquered territory, you have to conquer the minds of the people.
Exactly.
Reading this part of the source material, I was thinking about how this is exactly like a hostile corporate takeover.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right, because the new CEO doesn't just fire the old founder. They literally rewrite the company history to make the founder look like an incompetent monster that they bravely defeated to save the company. You have to destroy the legacy.
That is a brilliant analogy for what the author terms theological imperialism. The Indo-Europeans knew that physical subjugation wasn't enough.
Right.
As long as the people worshipped a great mother, the matrilineal social structure would always threaten the new patriarchal rulers.
Yeah.
So they systematically rewrote the religious myths of the conquered peoples to justify their new rule.
Walk us through how that works mechanically. How do you rewrite a civilization's god?
The most glaringly obvious example is the Babylonian creation myth known as the Enuma Elish. In the older original indigenous myths of that region, the creator goddess was supreme. But after the northern invasions, the myth is violently rewritten.
What happens?
The original creator goddess, Tiamat, is stripped of her benevolence. She's now depicted as a terrifying, chaotic, saltwater dragon or serpent.
Oh, wow.
And the new young male storm god, Marduk, representing the invaders, heroically murders her. He splits her body in half, and he builds the new world from her corpse.
He literally builds the new patriarchy on the dead body of the matriarchy. The symbolism isn't even trying to be subtle.
It's incredibly explicit. And this template repeats everywhere the Indo-Europeans conquered. In India, the male god Indra murders the goddess Danu, who is also depicted as a serpent.
Wow.
In Greece, Apollo murders the Python of Delphi, taking over the ancient female oracle site. Zeus overthrows the older earth deities, the Titans, to establish his rule on Olympus.
That's fascinating.
The author argues passionately that these aren't just fantasy stories or mythological poetry. They're direct political allegories for the patriarchal conquest of the goddess worshippers.
And the source material suggests that this collision of cultures birthed some of the most toxic social hierarchies that we are still dealing with today.
Yeah. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the author points out a stark demographic difference. These northern invaders were lighter-skinned, while the indigenous, agricultural, goddess-worshipping populations of the Mediterranean, the Near East, and India were generally darker-skinned.
Right.
She argues that the invaders, realizing they were outnumbered, instituted strict class systems to maintain control and prevent assimilation.
Like the caste system in India.
Exactly. The author notes that the Sanskrit word for caste, varna, literally translates to color.
Oh, wow.
The lighter-skinned invaders instituted brutal laws forbidding intermarriage to keep their bloodlines separate from the conquered darker peoples.
So the patriarchy and institutionalized racism are essentially born from the exact same historical moment, driven by the same invaders.
According to this historical synthesis, yes. And the author traces the dualistic concept of light versus dark directly back to this conflict. The invading patriarchal gods of light, fire, and the sky were deemed good. The indigenous female deities of the earth, the dark soil, and the serpent were suddenly deemed evil.
They re-engineered the moral compass of the ancient world.
They really did.
They made male and light equal good, and female and dark equal evil. But, practically speaking, on a day-to-day level, how do you enforce that?
Yeah.
If you have a society where women have owned the property for millennia and family descent naturally goes through the mother, you can't just decree men are in charge now and expect the economy to pivot.
You are hitting on the most crucial mechanical problem the patriarchs faced. To truly cement a patriarchy, you have to transition from a matrilineal inheritance system to a patrilineal inheritance system.
Right.
A father must be able to pass his wealth, his property, and his name to his son.
Right. But if women are sexually autonomous and they have multiple partners, you can never guarantee which man is the father of the child. Paternity is a biological guessing game.
Precisely. And if you cannot guarantee paternity, the patrilineal system collapses. Therefore, the most critical battleground in this entire historical transition became the absolute control of female sexuality. And the author points to the institution of the sacred women as the primary target.
The Kaddish too.
Yes. In the religion of the goddess, sex was not a sin. It was considered deeply holy.
Right.
It was the gift of the goddess, the fundamental mechanism of creating life and ensuring the fertility of the land. Women known as the Kadishtu, which translates directly from ancient languages to sacred women or holy women, lived within the vast temple complexes.
Okay.
As part of their religious duties, they engaged in sexual relationships with various men as a form of sacred sacrament.
And any children born from these temple unions simply took the mother's name, inherited her property, and belonged to her clan. The system was completely secure because maternity is never in doubt.
Exactly. But the author points out a devastating historical injustice here.
What's that?
Later male scholars, translating these ancient texts through the rigid lens of modern Judeo-Christian morals, consistently translated the word Kadishtu as temple prostitutes.
Wow. By doing that, they completely strip away the theological sanctity of what these women were doing.
Absolutely.
They apply a massive modern capitalist stigma to a sacred ancient rite. It basically turns a high priestess into a sex worker in the eyes of history.
It deliberately misunderstands and degrades the entire social structure.
Yeah.
Now, enter the Levite priests of the early Hebrew tribes.
Okay.
They were attempting to consolidate a strictly patrilineal society in Canaan, surrounded by populations that still deeply revered the goddess and her sacred women.
Right.
To survive and maintain their patriarchal structure, they had to eradicate the sexual autonomy of women.
So how did they do it?
The author argues that the Levite priests essentially invented the strict moral concepts of premarital virginity and marital fidelity for women.
Wait, you're saying they invented the concept of female virginity purely as a political tool?
That is the core of her thesis on this era. Under Levite law, a woman's sexuality was legally transformed into the exclusive property of her husband or her father.
Oh, wow.
If a Hebrew woman lost her virginity before marriage, she damaged her father's ability to sell her for a bride price.
Jeez.
If she was unfaithful after marriage, she threatened the husband's bloodline. And the punishment for these infractions wasn't a fine or a divorce or a public scolding.
What was it?
The punishment was death by stoning or burning.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate for a second here,
Sure.
because I think a lot of people hearing this might instinctively push back. Is it possible that some of these strict sexual laws were also primitive public health measures,
Okay.
like trying to prevent venereal diseases? Or maybe they were just desperate attempts to stabilize the family unit for survival in a really harsh, unforgiving desert environment, rather than just a calculated conspiracy to control women's bodies?
It's an excellent question, and it is actually the most common historical counterargument raised against this theory. Many scholars have argued that strict monogamous family structures aided group survival in antiquity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
However, the author counters this by pointing to the glaring structural double standard written directly into the laws themselves.
Because the laws didn't apply equally.
Exactly. If the motivation were purely about public health, preventing disease, or maintaining family stability, the laws would demand strict monogamy from both sexes.
Right, obviously.
But they didn't. According to Levite law, male polygamy was perfectly acceptable, even expected for men of means. A man could have multiple wives and numerous concubines. He could have sex with unmarried servants.
So it was entirely one-sided.
Yes. The violent, draconian punishments for sexual infidelity were applied exclusively to women. Therefore, the author concludes, the primary motivation wasn't health or survival. It was economic and political control.
Wow.
It was a desperate need to ensure male property lines by violently suppressing the independent sexuality of women.
And by extension, suppressing the goddess religion itself. Because I remember the source material detailing how the prophets of the Old Testament repeatedly used the metaphor of a harlot or a whore to describe the Hebrew people whenever they strayed back to worshiping the Queen of Heaven.
Which they did, constantly. The archaeological record shows that for centuries, the Hebrew people, including their kings and queens, kept slipping back into the worship of the goddess.
Really?
Yes, known in Canaan as Asherah or Ashtoreth. They kept building shrines to her under the sacred trees.
Oh, I see.
The Levite priests had to use terror, massacres, and constant threats of divine wrath to force the population to abandon the female deity and submit to the sole worship of the male god Yahweh.
But if you want to permanently kill off a rival religion, laws and physical violence are eventually going to fail. People will just worship in secret.
Right.
If you really want to eradicate a culture, you have to change their foundational story. You have to capture their mythology.
You have to rewrite the myth of creation itself. Which brings us to the absolute climax of the author's argument.
Unpacking the story of Adam and Eve as political propaganda.
Yes.
This section of the book absolutely blew my mind. So what does this all mean? The author's thesis is that the Garden of Eden story wasn't just a quaint pastoral fable about how the world began.
Right.
It was a deliberately crafted, highly weaponized piece of anti-goddess propaganda written by the Levite priests to destroy the matriarchy once and for all.
And when you decode the symbols of the Adam and Eve story through the lens of the ancient goddess religion we've just discussed, the author's theory snaps into startling, almost uncomfortable focus.
Yeah, let's break that down.
Let's look at the elements of the story one by one. First, the serpent.
Right. In our modern context, growing up with this story, the serpent is Satan. It is the ultimate deceiver, the embodiment of evil. But what did the serpent mean to the people living in Canaan at that time?
In the ancient world, prior to this myth, the serpent was the primary, most revered symbol of the goddess.
Wait, real?
Yes. Because it sheds its skin, it was seen as a symbol of immortality, rebirth, and female wisdom. It represented prophetic counsel and mystic insight.
Wow.
Priestesses at goddess shrines from Sumer to the Oracle of Delphi in Greece were intimately associated with serpents. The author argues that the Levite priests intentionally took the most sacred symbol of female wisdom and explicitly cast it as the ultimate villain.
The source of all lies and human misery.
Exactly.
It's the ultimate smear campaign. It's like they took all the symbols of the opposing political party, turned them into the bad guys of a bedtime story, and convinced everyone it was the literal history of the world.
Precisely.
Okay, what about the tree of knowledge of good and evil? What does the tree represent?
In goddess worship across Canaan, the sacred sycamore fig tree, known as the Asherah, stood beside her altars. It was the physical representation of the goddess's presence.
Ah.
To eat of its fruit was deeply symbolic of participating in the sacred sexual customs of the goddess religion.
Which perfectly explains the forbidden fruit.
Yes. The author posits that the forbidden fruit represents sexual consciousness, specifically the autonomous sacred sexuality of the goddess religion that the Levites were desperately trying to eradicate.
Because when Eve eats the fruit, she becomes sexually aware. She recognizes her nakedness.
Exactly.
And the myth goes out of its way. I mean, it makes it a central plot point to make sure we all know that Eve ate the fruit first.
That is the crux of the propaganda.
Yeah.
By having the woman eat the fruit first, acting upon the advice of the serpent, the goddess symbol, the myth places the entire catastrophic blame for the fall of humanity squarely on the shoulders of women.
Wow.
It acts as a dire warning to men. Do not listen to women, do not trust their wisdom, and do not partake in the sacred sexual customs of the goddess, or you will lose paradise forever.
So we have the serpent representing the old religion, the tree representing the shrines, the fruit representing sexual autonomy, and the woman bearing all the blame.
Yeah.
What is the ultimate payoff for the patriarchal writers? Like, why assemble all these symbols into this specific narrative?
The payoff is the punishment handed down by the supreme male deity at the end of the story.
Oh.
God turns to Eve, and he pronounces her sentence. I will greatly multiply your pain in childbearing, yet your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you.
He shall rule over you. There it is. The thesis statement of the patriarchy, carved into stone.
The author asserts that this single line of text is the entire reason the myth was constructed in the first place. It provides divine, unassailable justification for male supremacy.
Yeah.
It tells women, for all of recorded history moving forward, that their subjugation is not a political construct made by men.
Right.
It is not the result of a cultural invasion by chariot-riding nomads. It is a righteous punishment decreed by God himself for their inherent weakness, their gullibility, and their sinfulness.
And the terrifying part is that the narrative worked. It worked unbelievably well. It became the foundation of Western civilization.
It was devastatingly effective. And the author traces how this single story was leveraged as a political weapon for millennia.
Oh, yeah.
Fast forward a few centuries, and St. Paul uses the Adam and Eve story to demand that women remain silent in churches. He writes that Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in the transgression.
Wow.
Fast forward again, and St. Augustine uses it to argue that women were not made in the full image of God, but were merely helpers. Martin Luther used it to justify the absolute, unquestioned dominion of husbands over wives.
The source material even links this single myth to the European witch hunts, which just shows how long this hangover lasted.
She does. She suggests the millions of women tortured and burned at the stake in Europe during the witch trials were victims of this exact same theological weapon.
Because they were accused of consorting with the devil.
Exactly, which is just the serpent by another name.
Yeah.
And possessing carnal, sexually sinful natures inherited directly from Eve.
Right.
The witch hunts were, in many ways, the final eradication of the remnants of the goddess religion. You know, the local healers, the midwives, the women who held on to the old knowledge of herbs and bodies. The Adam and Eve myth is the ultimate historical example of how theology can be used as a political weapon to legally, socially, and physically subjugate half the human race.
It is a massive, almost overwhelming paradigm shift to try and wrap your head around.
It really is.
To sit back and realize that, according to this historical synthesis, we had a 7,000-year history of female creators. We had complex matrilineal societies where women owned property, ran businesses, and possessed total bodily autonomy. And that entire world, thousands of years of human achievement, was systematically buried by invading cultures, overwritten by physical violence, and permanently erased by a mythological smear campaign that we still read to children today.
It requires us to look at the very foundations of our civilization, the stories we take for granted, with a completely different lens.
Absolutely.
And as we wrap up this exploration, we must reiterate our impartial stance. We are not declaring Merlin Stone's historical synthesis to be the absolute, unquestionable truth of the ancient world.
Right. We're not historians making a definitive claim here.
Exactly. History is complex, and archaeological interpretation is always evolving. Nor are we invalidating the profound spiritual truths and comforts that billions of people find in their respective faiths today.
Of course not.
We are simply exploring her specific, highly provocative argument that the transition from female to male deities wasn't a matter of divine revelation, but rather a brutal, calculated political conquest.
Which leaves us with one incredibly profound thought to chew on as we close out this deep dive.
What's that?
We hear arguments all the time today, in political debates, in pop psychology podcasts, in endless internet forums, that male dominance or female submissiveness is just natural,
Right.
that it's baked into our biology, our DNA, that men are naturally leaders and women are naturally followers.
But you hear that a lot.
But if the author of this book is right, if this vast buried history of matrilineal power and goddess worship is accurate, how much of what we confidently call human nature today is actually just the lingering hangover of a 4,000-year-old theological propaganda campaign?
It raises a vital question about how much of our reality is constructed by the victors.
Seriously. If history had gone the other way, if those northern invaders had been repelled at the borders, if the architectural blueprint of those ancient matrilineal cities had remained the unshakable foundation of our modern world, what would human nature look like today?